Engage? How do I get married? I'm your host, Kevin Dennis. In addition to leading the charge at Wedding IQ, I also run Fantasy Sound Event Services, a lighting and entertainment company based in Livermore, California, that I founded over 35 years ago. Each week on this podcast, we'll explore a new corner of the wedding planning so you can prepare for your I-dos without the stress. From budgeting to booking vendors to day of drama, let's talk smart wedding planning. All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Now That I'm Engaged, How Do I Get Married? And we have the one and only Bri Marbais. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. I was nervous. It's the S. It throws me off. Probably did. Your probably first day of school was kind of hellish.
Still is.
Yeah. So I have 3 first names, so they would always get my names wrong. They would call me by the wrong name, and I'm like, just follow the cadence of everybody else's.
What to do?
Yeah. So anyway, but welcome, Bri. Before we get going, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised Floridian. I've lived on the same street my whole entire 32
No
years
way.
of living. Yep.
That's amazing.
Only seen snow twice in my life, so I'm definitely a Sunshine State girly. Went to UCF for hospitality, never thinking I would ever get into the wedding industry. And lo and behold, 10 years later, here I am. I've had firsthand experience as a venue and a vendor. And I am currently engaged myself. So,
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So I understand all sides of, the planning, the execution, the logistics, firsthand as venue vendor and now bride. So it's been great. And now I'm with Wedding Venue Map. We're a local venue and vendor search engine hyper-focused in Central Florida. So now I get to not only help couples, but the businesses as well. So it's great. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm excited because you're also a bride as well. So that means we can really pick your brain. So as we hit pause for a second, do you have the date picked, or are we planning, or what?
So we've been engaged 2 years, and honestly, because I'm in the industry, it's very hard. I've seen behind the curtain, and I look at things a little bit more logistically than a typical couple. Like the magic's not there necessarily. So, we are currently in the process of making headway and planning. So,
good. That's good.
Yeah, so I would say in the next year or so.
Yeah, good for you. It's my wife always tells me I am literally the worst person that she takes as a guest to a wedding, because I'm sitting there and I'm like,
look at things differently.
Yeah, I'm like, why aren't they doing this? And why is that person standing over there? They should be over there. And why is this going? And she's like, and she literally will go to the bar and go, have a drink, relax, and just
you're not working.
But it's just like, it's because we're there, and a wedding is work, and it's hard for me to relax. So
I get it.
All right. Well, we're here to talk about how to find the right vendors and which resources to use and why. So I guess as we dive in, for couples listening, how do we find the right vendor?
Yeah, I definitely think that couples should tap their friends. A lot of the time, depending upon the age range, you've had friends who have recently gotten married or in the same boat with you. So I think tap your friends, who did they work with and really enjoy, what venues did they look at, and, pro and con. So I think couples should tap into their friend group. And, if you're friends, you more than likely have similarities and things in common. So you might want to work with the same people, and, your friends might have done some of the homework already for you. So tap your friends first.
Well, that's okay. So we first is friends. Then where do you think we should go from there?
Yeah, I think, use your local resources. I think, depending upon the city, check and see if there are local directories that you can look into, online listings. The national platforms are great. The Not in Wedding Wire, just because everything is kind of living in one central location. Don't get hung up on what you see on those platforms. There are many other opportunities to investigate that venue or vendor. But I would look into, local resources first if where you're at and where you're planning has something like that for you.
Perfect. And then what about the wonderful preferred vendor lists that are out there that everyone has? How do you feel about those?
How do I honestly love a preferred vendor list truly because they know the property best. They know the venue best. They've worked there. There's a reason why they're on that list, and they're essentially an extension of the venue. You know, the venue wouldn't just put anybody on there that they didn't trust. You know, when I worked at the venue, the rule was you have to work a minimum of 3 weddings successfully to be considered for the list because
Oh.
we would never refer someone who we wouldn't hire for our own weddings or events. So I think the preferred list is a great place to start, you know, and some venues don't require that you work off of that list, but I think it's a really great jumping point because those vendors are going to know the venue in and out. And it's just going to be an easy process working off that list.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and it's as someone who is a vendor, you know, those lists are like gold because once you get in there, you know, it really is. And but even for couples though, it comes a level of trust, you know, like even with the friends, you know, like the friends, there's a trust that my friends hired these people, therefore, you know, therefore I'm probably gonna have the same connection.
You know, when you're going to weddings, like if you're attending weddings, you're like, oh my gosh, I love the food, or oh my gosh, I love, you know, that DJ or whomever. Just jot it down, ask your friend, like, who did you use? And that way, you know, when the time comes, you remember who that vendor was.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I agree. No, and that's the best thing as well. So, all right, you mentioned the knot and wedding wire and a few of few of those kind of sources. Why is one better than the other, or is there one better than the other when they're going through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the knot and wedding wire is great, like I said, because everything is centrally located and those platforms let you sort and source, narrow down favorite things. So I think it's just easy because it's all compiled into one place. So it's organized very nicely. And then from there, you know, take the list that you really like from those platforms and check out their social media and kind of dig a little bit deeper from there. I don't believe in letting the listing like completely turn you on or off because you know there are some venues and vendors that they sign up on these platforms and they never touch their profiles, and I always tell vendors, I'm like, you are so much better than what's on your online listing. Like, I love you so much, please update your stuff because it needs to be cohesive. Like, I would hate for a couple to bounce off of a listing because it doesn't look like they've touched it. So I encourage couples, like, don't be turned away by what you see on the listing. Just use it as kind of a way to, you know, organize things and get a list going and then dive deeper from there.
So it's a good start. And then, it's a good way to go.
It's an easy, organized way where everything is typically compiled into one spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if it's been a long time since I planned a wedding. You're going through it. I believe like the Knot even has like some planning tools that you might be able to use.
They definitely. Yeah. I haven't dabbled on them as a consumer, as a bride, but I know that the features and the benefits that that couples get now with being on the platform, it's amazing. So
yeah. All right, cool. All right. So we're looking for a vendor. We're trying to figure it out. Should we read reviews? Should we ignore reviews? Like how do and where should we look for reviews on some of these vendors?
I definitely think you should read reviews. I think that it's important it almost kind of helps with, how current are the vendors? Like, if you're, you know what I mean? Like if you're looking up a photographer and they haven't had a review for 4 or 5 years, like that's a red flag.
No, big time red flag.
Kind of like, how active are they? Are they even still in business? And I think it's really great to see firsthand experience from people who've worked with them before. Google reviews is great. I think that's a lot of the online platforms, not Wedding Wire, Zola, they have the opportunity for couples to leave reviews on those sites as well. But I say lean on Google. I think that's the one place, if anyone's going to leave a review anywhere, it's typically on Google. And I say, look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't just look at the most relevant, look at the bad ones, and then look at the good ones. So you can get a really well-rounded picture of the vendor.
I think that's some really good advice, Bri, because I think when as a vendor, we've all had our bad days or something has happened, but yeah, we are. And how do we respond to the review? I guess is the biggest.
That's another thing too. If the vendors aren't responding, that's always like as well. Like,
good, bad, and ugly. I think you need to respond, to all of it. Yeah. Okay. So you're a big Google person.
I think Google truly, I mean, and you can ask others that have had experience with that venue or vendor, or ask your venue, if they're looking at a certain photographer, have you ever worked with this company? If it's someone off of their preferred list, do they have any firsthand experience with them? But Google's king.
Google's king in everything. I probably use that app more than anything. And my younger,
it's quick.
Well, and usually now with the AI, I don't know if you've searched lately, that AI thing is amazing. So
it's wild.
Yeah, it really is. I love it.
Oh yeah.
All right. So we're searching, couples are out there searching for that perfect vendor, but what should they be looking for from, now we've narrowed it down, we've done some searches. So now what should we be looking for when we are having that interaction with the vendor?
I think, you obviously want to work with people that are going to align with you as a couple, align with your goals for your wedding. So you would want that what you're finding on the internet to kind of align with that. You want to have the warm and fuzzies when you land on their Instagram, their TikTok, their Facebook, their website. You want to feel comfortable and be like, oh, they get me, they understand me. So I think when looking at photos for inspiration, videos, like you want to make sure that you see yourself like, oh, I'm that couple. So I think it's important to make sure that it all aligns, and that it's, sometimes wedding planning can be for up to 18 months, and you definitely want to jive with your vendors, and it's a lot of money to get married. So, you want to make sure you're working with people who at the end of the day are going to make you feel good. So
yeah, it's funny. You hit on something, a lot of money. So I always, when I'm talking to my couple, sometimes I go, well, in wedding dollars, it's really not that expensive. In normal, if we're talking about everyday dollars, it's expensive. Kind of, it's funny when we're going through some stuff. So and something else you kind of touch on, like as a photographer, if I'm hiring a photographer, go do a photo shoot with them. Get out there. And that's where I think you really get to know, because I've had many of my couples go do photo shoots with a photographer and realize they don't mesh with this photographer
at all.
Yeah. And I've had it happen, like horror story, where a bride on the day of grabs me and goes, can you do whatever you can to just keep the photographer away from me? I don't like him.
Sad.
Right? Yeah. And it's going to show in her photos. Like, this is her one moment in time, and it's going to show in photos. So,
sometimes the internet can be super deceiving, but if you're not even getting a good vibe from what you're seeing on the internet, more than likely you're not going to in person either. So
no,
I think make that kind of like hit list, and then really divulge deeper, narrow it down, and then schedule Zoom chats, go grab coffee, and just make sure that, everything aligns.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing. And so with that, so now we're looking, but how many times, should we try to narrow it down to 2 to 4, vendors per category, or, how,
if you want to keep your sanity? Absolutely.
Well, yeah. Okay. I agree with you on that. I was just kind of saying, because I feel like,
depending upon where you're getting married, the market could be very saturated. I mean, me being in Orlando, we have just under 500 venues just in what's considered Central Florida.
Wow. That's overwhelming.
So I think that it can be very overwhelming, but at some point you just have to stop. You have to stop looking, stop following wedding blogs, stop following influencers, because it's just, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And at some point you just have to stop looking and pick your top 2 to 4 that you really want to take to the next level.
Start dating,
Make
trying to figure it out. Yeah.
No more FOMO.
Yeah. It's funny you said stop looking. I did that to a bride. I think it was one time we were talking. She kept like kind of reaching out. We've already has her wedding planned. Her wedding was probably about maybe 90 days. We were about 90, maybe 190 to 120 out, like, so we're close, like we're in the home stretch of her wedding. And she kept like looking at stuff on the Instagram. And finally I had to tell her, I'm like, you need to like stop looking at Instagram, put on blinders. We have this wedding planned and it's beautiful. You have a beautiful wedding planned and you can't just keep jumping on.
Get the noise out. You can just stop.
Yeah. You really, really do. Yeah. All right. So when a couple starts communicating with a vendor via like email, what types of questions should they be asking and why?
I think it's always interesting to know, how long have you been in the industry? Why did you get into the industry? An about page on a website is my favorite page on a site. So I think it's really cool when vendors are very open with common interests. So, maybe tapping into that when you start having conversations with them. I'm always curious too with certain vendors, like where have you worked before? Like what vendors have you worked at before? Just so I can get a pulse on like, the caliber of vendor, what type of vendor.
So they're working at the Ritz or the Holiday Inn is what you're saying. Yeah.
Just to see like, are we the same? Like, am I the right client for you? Are we the right fit? I'm always curious to see what are some of your favorite vendors to work with, asking a vendor, like if maybe there's a certain category you're stuck on, ask them for some referrals and references. But I think it's just breaking down that wall of it being, get a little personal with them. Cause again, you have a long way to go with them. So you want to make sure that you guys jive. So
it's very interesting you said get personal because it is a relationship.
100%.
Yeah. And you really have to enjoy going back to that poor bride that did not like her photographer. I'm positive.
I cannot imagine.
I'm positive there was like red flags that came up before we even got to the wedding day.
Throw a red flag, like it's just not worth it. Like it's not, if you're just having to be like, well, it's okay. We'll know. Like it's not worth it. There's so much great talent and everywhere you might be getting married that if they show their true colors in the beginning, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. And you mentioned communicate. So like communication, how do you think couples today are communicating with their vendors?
They want it now.
Okay.
Amazon Prime mentality now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Really challenging. I feel really bad for vendors because there's so many different, there's DM on Instagram. They're them messaging through the portal on Not Wedding Wear Zola, email. So I think vendors have their work cut out for them because couples are coming from every which way possible, and they need to be where the couples are. And it's long gone are the days of, well, I only respond via email. Well, your couples are in your DMs, so go get them.
Well, and even like I'm finding some of our couples even want a text message.
100%.
Yeah, because that's we always get older in the wedding industry, but our clients stay the same age, and this is
I'm like, when are we going to age out?
Yeah, I know.
I'm out of this.
But it's and I was joking. I'm like, we're at the age of text messaging right now because and that with that said, it's DMs, Instagram, going
quick, short, and easy.
Yeah,
it's important as a couple to find out from your vendor, like, what's your preferred method of communication? How should I be reaching out to you? Are there certain things you prefer over email? Are there certain things you prefer over text? Like, how are we going to do this for the next 12 months?
All right. I agree. And I think too, like as a vendor, I always let my couples know, like I have an out of office reply on my email, and and even to the point, it sounds silly, but we, through our phone system, couples can text with us and we're able to set up a out of office reply for text messaging as well, just to let them know like, hey, we're working a wedding. And I think couples need to have that mentality. Like you need to let that vendor go work.
You're not the only bride.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I feel like you wouldn't want that vendor responding to other brides on your wedding day. So I think you need to have that respect.
Yeah, I think vendors just have to set the expectation too. Like couples, they don't know any better. They've more than likely not done this before. So they have tunnel vision. They think they're the only ones getting married. And, it might be 6 months from now. It might be 18 months from now. So I think vendors have to do better about setting the expectations and what is the process really going to look like. Just so everyone's on the same level playing field and no one gets upset when they're not getting responded to fast enough.
Yeah. Especially like if you reach out on a Friday night and then the vendor doesn't get back to you until Tuesday morning because they've had 3 weddings that weekend and they take Monday off and Tuesday they're back at it. So, just I think a little bit of patience and a little bit of grace will go a long way when you're trying to work with vendors as well. Absolutely. Because, and with that said, especially I think it comes from more of the people that are artists, if you're dealing with a rental company, a venue, some of the, transportation companies, some of these people that have like a whole customer service team out. Yeah. And I think you have a little bit less grace with them, but if you're dealing with a photographer that, this,
one-man show possibly.
Yep. Yeah. And have a little bit more, patience and grace. So it goes a long way. So
I agree.
All right. So should a couple meet with them before hiring them? Why and why not?
100%. I could not fathom booking somebody without meeting them. When I worked at the venue I worked at, I used to have couples book the venue completely sight unseen, and it would just give me the heebie-jeebies. And it's personal opinion, but like I said, it's a lot of money you're investing in a wedding. And I just think it's really important that you're 100% sure. And I really think at minimum a phone call.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting too. Like last night, so we're recording this on a Monday. Last night I had a wedding and I never met the couple until the day of the wedding because mom and dad planned everything. Yep. And so I
had that happen a lot at the venue.
Yeah. And I feel sorry for the couple because I had zero, like the bride walked up to me at one point. She goes, "I'm the bride." I'm like, "I'm the DJ. Nice to meet you." Like it was just kind of like, I'm like, this is awkward. I'm like, I've never until the last maybe 12, 13 months that this is the first that I've been dealing with it. So couples, don't let your parents plan your wedding. I guess is my point that I'm trying to make, because it's just like, because you're not going to get what you want. You're going to get what they want or what they're planning with as well. So I think
especially for the vendors that are providing like an in-person experience, right? Like a DJ, photographer.
Yeah.
Like if it's a rental company, I mean, obviously you can go online, you can see their inventory, maybe picking your chargers online and never like meeting the rental person is one thing, but could never step foot on at your venue until it's, you've signed a contract or never have had a phone call with your photographer. I couldn't. It's not worth it. Just make the time.
No, I really agree with you on that, especially when it comes to venues, because the way a venue looks in photos may be
deceiving.
100%. Like it's funny. We just had this conversation last night. There's a venue in my market that was 15 years ago, the Primo vendor venue here. Right. And they still are showing those same photos of this beautiful landscaping. Yeah. And then you go to that venue now and there's crabgrass and just weeds and no more flowers. And the buildings are painted a different color than they were on the website. So
wild.
If someone ordered, just book that venue sight unseen and you show up, you're going to feel like you got duped because it's almost like you ever seen the abandoned amusement park or, where you, it's almost, that's the feeling I get when I'm on this property, because we used to work on this property so much, but now it's just like, I'm like, it's like someone just abandoned it and let it go bad. So it's so sad.
With what I do now with Wedding Venue Map, a big part of what we do is we attend all the wedding shows and we talk to the couples in our booth to try to help them find venues and vendors. And that we were just at one yesterday, and this bride made a list of her top 10 venues that she wanted. That she wanted to potentially tour.
Mm-hmm.
She drove by her bottom 5, knowing that the curb appeal mattered so much to her. So she drove by unannounced on a whim past 5 of them, and she knocked 4 of them off the list just because of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the internet can be deceiving. So please.
Yeah. And that's even the same, I think, for all the categories as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. The one thing I will say that I do remember that my wife and I messed up on is when we were visiting vendor, we did all the cake tasting in like 2 days. And that was the wrong thing to do.
Did it all blur together?
Well, and it was all so much. It was too much sweet.
Oh yeah.
It got. I'm like, I was getting disgusted by like the third person, and it's like I was like, this is a bad decision. I think we needed to spread these out because we went in with the mentality, which I think we just was like, all right, we're gonna knock one,
check it off the list.
Yeah. Yep. And that's and I think that's take your time, and don't go crazy and do them all back to back. So, all right, Bri, anything that we may have haven't mentioned about hiring a vendor that you can?
Yeah, I think on the venue side, something to keep in mind, depending upon the type of property, maybe like a hotel or not your like mom and pop privately owned, some venues have no control over their own social media. Some of them, they have a marketing company that might not even ever step foot on property, and they're just using images that someone is providing to them. So I think it's important to look at tagged photos on Instagram also, because more than likely planners, photographers, they're sharing the work that they've done at that space. And it's possibly going to be better than what you're seeing on the feed of that venue.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say, obviously look at their feed, but sometimes, for example, one of our venues is our performing arts center, and there's never wedding content on the feed just because it just gets buried with all the other things. And I always tell couples, just look at the tagged photos, just take a glance at the tagged photos also, because you're going to find a lot more inspiration and availability of content on the tag side of things. Same with vendors. I say look at the feed and look at the tag photos.
Yeah, and I think that's some really great advice, because some of these you think of like a Marriott, Hilton,
a lot of Four Seasons, they don't, sometimes they don't even have the capacity to go after photos after weddings to get updated content. So I always say, just make sure you're looking at the tagged photos as well, because it tends to be a little bit more current, a little bit more recent than what can be sometimes found on a feed for a venue or a vendor.
Well, yeah, and even like you were mentioning the performing arts, like they have a beautiful building, but they're more about the art, not about the
wedding
the
is
venue
a very
space.
small piece of the puzzle. Get buried, which is so sad because it's chef's kiss, gorgeous. But they have no control over their social presence. Yeah.
And I'm even thinking about like city rent venues as well. Like there's
same thing.
Yeah. Because their least priority is these beautiful venues that some of these 100%. Cities have as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was some great advice. All right. Anything else?
Just be patient. There's a lot of outside noise when it comes to planning a wedding. So just try to stay true to who you are as a couple and enjoy the process. Take your time. Yeah.
Well, okay. It's fun. It's funny. You just hit on something, outside noise. I think that's something that couples really need to because it's going to be coming at you. I remember, okay, so Bri, you're getting married and you're engaged. So you're getting unsolicited advice from people like crazy. And I'm sure you are, because it happened to me, but it only gets it. So you got to, and the one thing I always tell my couples is all this unsolicited advice, because I just met with a couple and they were like, yeah, this girl at work is making us think twice about doing XYZ. And I'm like, no, stop. Don't let this outside person influence you. Because I even forget what it was, but it was a good idea, but I was like, no, it's a great idea. I'm like, no, don't let this person ruin or taint your view of what you're doing.
But it just brings out a really interesting side of people. Like, it's crazy.
It really is. So it brings out the good, bad, and the ugly in people, and it's just from who you have to invite to all that kind of stuff. So it's almost you as a couple have to have a united front, and 100%. You have to have and you have to have some thick skin in order to get through this, because if you choose because if you choose to have children, it gets even like, take the wedding advice, and it's someone that has a dad of 3. The kids, you get like the wedding is preparing you for having children if you choose to do so, because you'll get unsolicited advice from everybody, like more advice than you got about the wedding. You're going to get from people because they see you with a baby, or they see you with
the grocery store.
No, the grocery store is the worst place. I got the worst advice from because my wife was a school teacher when we were having our children, and so on Mondays, which was typically the wedding day off, I watched the kids, and so they would tag along with me to the grocery store and Costco, and moms would. And one of our daughters suffered from colic, and she just had it just bad. And so, and she started crying, and they're like, and they would look at me as a male, like I'm an idiot with a kid. And I'm like, no, I'm like, some lady was trying to give me advice, and I looked at her and I go, actually, no, she suffers from reflux and colic. And, our errands are taking us about maybe 20 minutes longer than I anticipated. And I need to get her home and give her medicine, and she'll stop crying. Like, so anyway.
Yeah.
That's my rant on unsolicited advice. So please, couples, please, have a united front and really.
Most important to you as a couple. What are certain things, like personal things, like you want to incorporate in the wedding, and just enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is sometimes you got to let a parent have a win. So if it's not important to you.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Pick the hills you want. Pick the hills you're going to die on.
Yeah, exactly. And if mom wants to have that, and it doesn't, you don't really, then let her have that, kind of thing.
I agree.
Especially if they're contributing money. So
I'm team parents. I know it's terrible.
Yeah. No, it's not terrible. So, all right, Bri, I think you gave our listeners a lot to really think about when they're really trying to pick their vendors. It's not an easy. It's a hard thing to do. So I will say this though, picking your vendors is probably the second hardest. The worst hardest is the table, like a table of seat assignments is the worst part. That was the worst part of when we got married. I hated, that was literally, my wife and I probably had the most fights over that.
Well, that's everything as RSVPs come in, and it's just like, it's a daunting task that never ends.
No, I agree. 100%. So. All right, Bri, how would someone get in contact with you if they need more vendor advice?
Yeah, so Wedding Venue Map is our Instagram handle, so you can DM us then through that platform. We're all up in the DMs, helping couples all over, however you need. My email, bri@weddingvenuemap.com, and always here to help.
All right, we really appreciate that. All right, before we let you go, the one we always ask a question is, what is your favorite part of a wedding? And I'm kind of really curious, as someone that's planning a wedding, what is your favorite part of a wedding?
The wedding dress.
Oh, okay. I love that.
I worked in bridal fashion for 3 years, and it was always my favorite part of a wedding. Even before that, it's always a part of the industry I knew I wanted to dip my toes in. And I love fashion, and I think bridal fashion is just so good. So I'm always so curious to see what in, attire, tux, things like, I think just wedding attire in general, to see what does the couple decide to go with, and how, they feel and look on wedding day. And I just love it. The fashion.
I love it too, because we had a long time where it wasn't very formal, and now formal is starting to come back, and it's starting to come. Yeah. And it's kind of
coming in hot.
Yeah, really hot. And black and white is really, it's all coming in hot. So I love that.
The wedding fashion. Yep.
All right. Well, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of Now That Engaged, How Do I Get Married? Don't forget to, review us, love us on all the different platforms that are out there. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Bri.
You're welcome. Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Now That I'm Engaged, How Do I Get Married podcast, brought to you by Fantasy Sound Event Services. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please get in touch with me if you have a topic you would like us to cover, or if you are struggling with your wedding planning. Please be sure to submit a question at podcast@fantasysound.com. I encourage you to check out our other episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a fan, we'd love if you would subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It helps others find our podcast so they can learn from our guests too. And to everyone listening, happy wedding planning.